A werewolf romance written by Olivia Smith. There is a kind of silence that only exists underground. Not the silence of sleep. Not the silence of peace. The silence of a person who has stopped believing anyone is coming. Who has pressed her back against cold stone so many times the shape of it is carved into her memory. Who has learned to count days by the dripping of water from a crack in the ceiling, 1 drop, 2 drops, 3, because if she stops counting, she will lose herself entirely. She was a princess once. She had a name that made grown men bow. And she gave it all up, willingly, to protect something that mattered more than her own survival. This is the story of what 4 years in the dark does to a woman, and what happens when the most powerful alpha king in the realm walks into that darkness the night her heart decides it has had enough. Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. Chapter 1. The night her heart stops. The first thing that leaves you in a dungeon is your pride. The second thing is your sense of time. By the 3rd year, I had lost both so completely that when I woke each morning, if you could call the thin gray light that seeped through the iron grate above my head morning, I no longer remembered what it felt like to be warm. My name, the one they had stripped from me and replaced with a number scratched into the stone above my cell door, was Seraphine Aldaravos. But no one had spoken it in 4 years. The dungeon beneath Keldrath Keep had 9 cells. I was in the last one, farthest from the stairs, farthest from the sound of boots on stone, farthest from any voice that might accidentally remind me I was still human. They had put me here on purpose. I understood that now. Distance was its own kind of punishment. I was 23 years old when they brought me down here. I would be 27 in 11 days, if I lived that long. Tonight, I was not sure I would. The pain had started 2 hours ago, or what I estimated was 2 hours, measured in 43 drips from the ceiling crack. It began as a tightness in my chest, the kind I had felt before during the worst of the cold months, when the stone walls wept with frost, and my breath came out in white clouds that disappeared before they reached the grate. But this was different. This tightness had teeth. It radiated down my left arm and up into my jaw and sat behind my breastbone like a fist pressing inward. I pressed my back against the wall and slid to the floor. The straw beneath me was old and damp and smelled of mildew and something I preferred not to identify. My dress, once a deep burgundy wool, now a gray and shapeless rag, offered no warmth. My feet were bare. They had taken my boots in the first month. A small cruelty, the kind that costs nothing and takes everything. I focused on breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The fist in my chest squeezed harder. I had survived hunger. I had survived cold. I had survived the particular madness that comes from total isolation. The voices that start in your own head and begin to sound like other people. I had survived all of it by holding one thought in the center of my mind, like a candle flame in a storm. She is alive. As long as I stay silent, she is alive. But the candle was guttering now. My vision blurred at the edges. The dripping from the ceiling seemed to slow, each drop taking longer than the last to fall, as though time itself was thickening around me. I pressed my palm flat against the stone floor. Cold. Real. Solid. I focused on that. Stay here. Stay present. But my body was done taking orders. The pain crested, a wave so enormous and white-hot that I could not breathe through it, could not think through it, could only curl forward and press my forehead to the stone floor and wait for it to break. It did not break. It built. I heard myself make a sound I did not recognize. Not a scream, not a cry. Something older and more animal than either. My fingers scraped the stone. My lungs seized. This is it, I thought with a strange and terrible clarity. This is where it ends. And then, boots. Not the heavy, indifferent boots of the evening guard who slid a bowl of gray broth under my door without looking at me. These boots were different. The sound of them was different. They struck the stone stairs with the precise, unhurried confidence of someone who had never once in their life been afraid of what waited at the bottom. One set of boots, moving fast. I could not lift my head. The pain had stolen everything from my body except the faintest thread of consciousness. I lay on the stone floor, cheek pressed against the cold, and I listened to those boots come closer. Past the first cell, past the second, past all of them, straight to mine. The iron bolt slammed back. The door opened. Light, real light, torchlight, warm and orange and enormous after 4 years of gray, flooded the cell and burned my eyes so completely that I could not see the figure standing in the doorway. I could only see the outline of him, tall and broad and utterly still, the torch in his hand casting his shadow long across the floor until it fell over me like a blanket. A voice, deep, controlled, and underneath the control, something that did not belong, something that cracked through the stone composure like a fault line splitting bedrock. "What?" the voice said quietly. "Have they done to you?" I tried to speak. My mouth moved. No sound came. The boots crossed the cell in 3 strides. The torch was set somewhere. I heard the scrape of iron, and then hands were on me. Large hands. Warm. The warmth of them against my frozen skin was so violent in its contrast that I gasped. "Stay awake." The voice again, close now, low and urgent. "Look at me. Open your eyes, and look at me." I tried. The pain in my chest was a living thing now, pressing upward through my throat, and my vision was narrowing from the edges inward, the gray creeping in from all sides the way it did before sleep. But this was not sleep. I knew this was not sleep. "Look at me." The authority in those 2 words was unlike anything I had ever heard. Not the cold authority of a jailer. Not the bored authority of a lord who has given too many commands to remember any of them. This was the authority of someone who refused, on a fundamental cellular level, to accept that something could not be done. I opened my eyes. He was not what I expected. I do not know what I expected. A soldier, perhaps. A lord's captain. Someone sent on an errand. Not this. Not a man who looked at me, filthy, broken, starving, barely alive on a dungeon floor, with an expression that could only be described as devastated. His eyes were the color of deep water in winter. His jaw was sharp, unshaven, and clenched so hard I could see the muscle working beneath the skin. There was a scar that cut through his left brow and disappeared into his hairline. He was dressed in riding clothes, dark and plain, but the quality was unmistakable. The cut, the leather, the silver buckle at his throat. And at that silver buckle, a crest. A crest I recognized. A crest that made no sense in a dungeon in Keldrath Keep, in a cell where no one important had ever come, in a place designed specifically so that no one important would ever come. The crest of the Draven Crown. My mouth formed a word before my mind could stop it. "You." The pain detonated. White. Everywhere. A roar in my ears like the ocean. And then the dungeon, and the torchlight, and those winter-dark eyes watching me with something that looked terrifyingly close to grief. All of it folded inward and went dark. The last thing I felt was his hands catching me before I hit the floor. The last thing I heard was his voice. Low, cracked open, saying something in a language I barely knew. The old tongue, the alpha tongue, words that were not meant for human ears. I did not know their meaning then. Later I would learn that what he said, in the old language, pressing his hands over my stilled heart, in a dungeon that smelled of mildew and forgotten years, was this: "You are not allowed to die. Not tonight. Not before I know your name." Chapter 2. The Girl Who Was Traded for Silence. I was 19 years old the night my father sold my future for a lie. Not sold. That is too harsh a word, and my father was not a harsh man. He was a frightened one, which is so much worse. Frightened men make decisions that echo for decades. They build walls out of their fear and call them protection. They hand their daughters to silence and call it love. Let me go back to the beginning. My name, my real name, not the number scratched above a dungeon door, is Seraphine Aldara Voss. I was born the second daughter of House Voss, a noble family of modest rank in the eastern territory of Keldric, where the hills roll like frozen waves, and the winters come 6 weeks earlier than anywhere else in the realm. We were not wealthy, we were not powerful, but we were old, and in Keldric, old bloodlines carry their own quiet currency. My father was Edran Voss, a tall man, silver at the temples before his time. He had a laugh that filled rooms and eyes that went very still and very careful when he was afraid. I loved him completely and understood him imperfectly, which is perhaps the most honest way to love a parent. My mother had died when I was 6. A fever, quick and merciless. She had left behind 2 daughters, a husband who never fully recovered, and a house that always felt slightly too large for the people left inside it. My sister's name was Kalindra. Kalindra Voss, 4 years older than me. Brilliant in the way that certain people are brilliant, not loudly, not performatively, but with a quiet, structural intelligence that revealed itself slowly, like a building whose architecture you only truly understand once you are standing inside it. She read everything. She remembered everything. She saw patterns in people's behavior that others missed entirely. She was also, at 23, deeply and secretly in love with a man she could not have. His name was Thessaly Oren, the 3rd son of a merchant family, charming and warm and entirely unsuitable by the rigid standards of Keldric nobility. They had met at a midsummer gathering when Kalindra was 19. By the time I understood what was happening between them, they had already been meeting in secret for 3 years. I was the only one who knew. She had told me on a cold afternoon in November, sitting at the edge of the frozen stream behind our house, her breath white in the air, her eyes the most alive I had ever seen them. "I trust you," she said simply. "I trust only you." That was the beginning of everything. The autumn I turned 19, a letter arrived at our house bearing the seal of House Marvek, one of the most powerful noble families in Keldric, old money and older grudges, with a vast estate in the northern hills, and a reputation for being exactly the kind of people you did not refuse. Lord Cavan Marvek was looking for a bride for his eldest son, Dorian. He had selected Kalindra. My father came to me the night he received the letter. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, with his hands folded, and his eyes very still and very careful, and he told me what had been decided. Kalindra would marry Dorian Marvek. It was a significant match. It would secure the family's position for a generation. It was not a question. I said nothing for a long time. Then I said, "She will not survive it." My father looked at me. "She loves someone else," I said. "She has loved him for 4 years. If you make her marry Dorian Marvek, you will not be giving her a husband. You will be giving her a prison with better furnishings." My father was quiet for a moment. "Who?" he said finally. "Thessaly Oren." The name landed in the room like a stone in still water. My father closed his eyes. "That is impossible," he said. "I know," I said. "I am not asking you to make it possible. I am asking you not to make it worse." But Lord Cavan Marvek was not a patient man, and House Voss was not in a position to negotiate. The letter had been courteous, but underneath the courtesy was the unmistakable shape of an ultimatum. A match would be made. The only question was which daughter. It was Kalindra who came to me 3 nights later. She sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, and she did not cry, which frightened me more than tears would have. She sat very straight and she said, "I am with child." The room went very still. "Thessaly's?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Yes." "How long?" 2 months. I understood immediately what this meant. If Lord Cavan Marvek discovered that his chosen bride was pregnant by a merchant's son, the consequences would not end with the cancellation of the match. They would end with Kalindra destroyed, her name, her future, her child's future, all of it. And my father's house with her. "I will go instead," I said. Kalindra stared at me. "Dorian Marvek does not know what I look like," I said. "He has never met either of us. The letter selected a Voss daughter. I am a Voss daughter. Seraphine, you need 6 months," I said. "Long enough to have the child somewhere safe. Long enough to disappear with Thessaly, if that is what you choose. I can give you 6 months." "You cannot give me 6 months married to Dorian Marvek." "No," I said quietly. "I probably cannot." What I did not tell her, what I had already understood sitting there in the dark with the cold November air pressing against the windows, was that 6 months was not what she would need. She would need longer. She would need forever. Because once I stepped into that role, stepping back out would unravel everything. I had already decided. In the space of 60 seconds, I had decided. Her child deserved to live without the shadow of this secret. Kalindra deserved the life she had chosen, even if it was a difficult one. And I was 19 and unattached, and still young enough to believe that sacrifice was romantic. I was wrong about that last part, but I did not know that yet. 3 weeks later, I arrived at Marvek Estate as Kalindra Voss, eldest daughter of House Voss, intended bride of Dorian Marvek. 6 weeks after that, Dorian discovered I was not who I claimed to be. He did not send me home. He put me in the dungeon. Chapter 3. The boy who became a monster. Dorian Marvek had a face designed for trust. That was the first thing I noticed when I arrived at the estate in a borrowed carriage with my sister's name on my lips and my own name buried somewhere in my chest. He was standing at the top of the stone steps when I arrived, hands clasped behind his back, expression arranged into something that resembled warmth. Sharp jaw, light eyes, dark hair swept back from a clean forehead. He was 26 and handsome in the polished, deliberate way that certain men curate, the way they choose their clothes and their expressions with equal care. He descended the steps as I stepped from the carriage. "Kalindra Voss," he said, and smiled. I smiled back. "My Lord Marvek," I said. He offered his hand. I took it. His grip was firm and dry, and held half a second too long. "You are exactly as described," he said. I did not ask who had described me. I simply nodded and smiled, and walked into his house, and began the most complex performance of my life. The first 2 weeks were almost manageable. Dorian was attentive without being warm. He asked questions that sounded casual and were not. He watched me across dinner tables, and during morning walks through the estate's formal gardens with a quality of attention that felt less like admiration and more like assessment. He was gathering information. I understood this because I was doing the same. What I gathered was this. Dorian Marvek was brilliant, controlled, and profoundly transactional. He did not want a wife. He wanted an alliance, the Voss bloodline, its connections to Kaldrick's eastern families, the quiet social legitimacy that a good marriage conferred. He had no interest in me as a person. He had interest in what I represented. This was, in a terrible way, a relief. It meant he was not paying attention to me, to who I actually was. He was paying attention to the role, and I could play the role. I played it well for 6 weeks. I memorized everything Kalindra had ever told me about herself, her preferences, her habits, the particular way she held her teacup. I wrote nothing down because nothing could be discovered. I kept everything in my head, rehearsed like lines in a play, and each morning I woke up and put Kalindra on like a coat and walked through another day. I wrote to Kalindra twice, using a false name and a route we had arranged, letters that read like correspondence between friends, but contained coded updates beneath the surface pleasantries. She wrote back. She was safe. She was with Thessaly. She was grateful in a way that humbled and frightened me simultaneously. "Hold on," her letters said between the lines. "Just a little longer." But 6 weeks into my performance, Dorian's secretary made a mistake. A letter arrived addressed to the real Kalindra Voss, from a cousin in the Eastern District, referencing a childhood memory that Kalindra had never shared with me. A specific afternoon, a specific name, a specific incident involving a dog and a broken fence post at the Voss estate. Dorian showed it to me at dinner, "Do you remember this?" he asked pleasantly, sliding it across the table. I read it. My face did not change. "Of course," I said. "Though the dog's name is wrong, it was Birch, not Bram." I was guessing. I had a 50% chance of being right. Dorian looked at me for a long, smooth moment. "The dog's name," he said, "was Bram." The room did not change. The candles did not flicker. The wine in my glass did not move. But something in Dorian's face shifted, something small and controlled and absolutely cold. And I understood in that instant that the performance was over. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand, or strike the table, or make any of the gestures that angry men usually make. He simply folded the letter, placed it back in his breast pocket, and cut a piece of his roasted venison with the careful, precise movements of someone who has already decided how the evening will end. "Who are you?" he said quietly. I considered lying again. For perhaps 3 seconds I considered it. Then I put down my fork. "Seraphine," I said. "The second daughter." "Why?" One word. Flat as a blade. I told him the truth. Not all of it. Not Thessaly. Not the child. But enough. I told him that my sister had been unable to come. That I had come in her place to buy her time. That I had intended no lasting deception. Dorian listened without expression. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his wine, took a measured sip, and set the glass back down with the gentle precision of a man who breaks things only when he intends to. "You have made a fool of me," he said. "I have made a fool of myself," I said. "You have lost nothing but 6 weeks." "You do not understand what I have lost," he said, and something in his voice, something underneath the control, was different from anything I had heard from him before. It was not anger, exactly. It was something older and uglier, something wounded and turned rotten from not being tended to. He stood. He called for his guard captain, and he told him, in the same quiet, controlled voice, to take me to the lower dungeon and ensure I was housed in the farthest cell. I was put down those stairs that same night. I did not see daylight again for 4 years. What I learned later, months later, through fragments and whispers and things the night guard sometimes muttered to each other, was that Dorian had told no one what had actually happened. He had told his father and his household staff that Kalindra Voss had arrived damaged, mentally unfit, unsuitable for marriage, and was being housed for her own protection, while the Voss family was quietly informed. He had destroyed my name without using it. He had imprisoned me without revealing I existed. He had sealed me in the dark and told the world a story that made him the responsible party, and me the unfortunate circumstance. It was, I would come to understand, the most Dorian Marvek thing he could possibly have done. He did not want revenge. He wanted control. And a girl in a dungeon with no name and no witness was the most controlled version of me he could arrange. Chapter 4. What the Dark Teaches You. By the end of the first month, I understood that survival in a dungeon is almost entirely a mental problem. The physical suffering is real. I do not want to minimize it. Hunger is not metaphorical when you have not eaten in 3 days. It becomes a physical presence, a living ache that takes up residence behind your ribs and never fully leaves, even after they slide a bowl of thin broth under the door. Cold is not poetic when the stone walls sweat with frost and your feet have lost sensation to the ankle. The body registers all of it faithfully, without mercy, without adaptation. But the body, I discovered, is more resilient than we believe. The mind is the thing that requires constant tending. The first danger is time. Without structure, without daylight, without the rhythm of ordinary life, time becomes elastic and terrifying. Days bleed into each other. I lost 2 weeks once, simply could not account for them, could not reconstruct them from memory, and found myself on what I estimated was a Tuesday morning, with no clear recollection of the previous fortnight. That frightened me more than anything the cold had done. So I built structure. Deliberately, methodically, the way you might build a shelter from available materials in a wilderness, Not because the materials are good, but because a poor shelter is better than none. I counted drops from the ceiling crack. I assigned them units, 40 drips to a quarter hour, roughly. I was not accurate. I did not need to be accurate. I needed a scaffold for time, something to hang the hours on so they did not collapse into formlessness. I recited everything I knew. Poetry my mother had taught me before she died. The names of every person I had ever met, in order from earliest memory. The layout of every room in the Voss estate. The sequence of wildflowers that bloomed along the eastern hill road in spring, in the order they appeared. I recited these things not because they mattered, but because the act of recall, the mental effort of retrieving and organizing, kept the edges of my mind sharp when everything else wanted to blur. I wrote on the walls, not with ink, with a fragment of stone that had crumbled from the ceiling. I scratched the days into the mortar between the stones, small marks in groups of 7, because 7 was a number I could hold. When I reached what I calculated was 30 days, I scratched a single longer line across the group. I had, by the end of the first year, a section of wall that was entirely covered in these small scratched records. No one ever looked at it, but it mattered to me enormously. The second danger is self. This one is harder to explain. There is a version of yourself that emerges in total isolation, a version shaped by the absence of other people, by the removal of all social context, by the long confrontation with your own thoughts in a space where there is nothing else to look at. This version is not always kind. It is not always rational. It asks questions. Was it worth it? That was the question I wrestled with most in the second year. The first year was survival, raw, urgent, focused. The second year was reckoning. I had stabilized enough that the silence had space in it, and the silence began to speak. Was it worth it? She is safe, yes, but are you sure? How do you know? The letters stopped after the first year. The route you arranged has gone cold. You have heard nothing in 10 months. Is she safe, or have you simply decided she is safe because the alternative is unbearable? I had no answer. What I had instead was a choice, and I made it the same way each time the question surfaced. I chose to believe she was safe, not because I had evidence, because the alternative, that I was here, in this dark, for nothing, was a thought I could not survive, and survival was still the project. The third danger is hope. Hope in a dungeon is both necessary and dangerous. You need it to survive. But hope that is too specific, too attached to a particular outcome, becomes a trap. I learned to hold it loosely. Not I will be rescued by spring. Not Kalindra will come for me. Something vaguer, steadier, more structural. Things change. Everything changes. This is not permanent. I repeated it so many times it stopped feeling like hope and started feeling like physics. In the third year, the night guard changed. The new one was an older man named, I learned from the sound of other guards calling to him, Peter. He was different from his predecessors in one small, significant way. He sometimes spoke. Not to me. I was not a person to him. But he spoke to himself, or to the dungeon in general, in the way that solitary men sometimes do when they are used to being alone. He muttered. He commented on the weather above as he descended the stairs. He grumbled about his knees on cold mornings. He occasionally hummed something low and tuneless while he made his rounds. I learned to listen for him the way desert animals learn to listen for rain. Through his muttering, over 14 months, I assembled a fragmentary picture of the world above. Lord Edrin Marvek, Dorian's father, had died. Dorian had taken full control of the estate. There was trouble in the northern territories, border disputes, something about grazing rights escalating into something uglier. The Draven King had sent emissaries twice to mediate. The second time, the emissaries had returned with an ultimatum. And then, 3 months ago, 3 months before tonight, Pater had descended the stairs muttering something that made me press myself against the door to hear. The king himself, coming to Keldrath, to inspect the northern holdings. Dorian's been cleaning the place top to bottom for a week. The Draven King. Coming here? I had pressed my forehead against the cold iron of the door and breathed very carefully. Things change. Everything changes. This is not permanent. But I had not allowed myself to build a structure of hope around it. I had heard it, registered it, and let it sit in the back of my mind like a seed in dry soil, present, but not yet granted permission to grow. 3 months had passed since then. Tonight, my heart had tried to stop, and someone had come down the stairs. Chapter 5. The King Who Should Not Be Here. I woke in warmth. For a moment, for one long, disoriented moment, I did not know where I was. The warmth was so alien to my body, so thoroughly outside anything my nervous system had catalogued in 4 years, that I could not process it. I lay very still and simply felt it. The weight of something over me, heavy and dry and warm, smelling of horses and pine resin and cold night air. A cloak. Someone had put a cloak over me. Memory returned in pieces. The pain, the floor, the boots on the stairs, the torchlight, the face above me, sharp jaw, winter dark eyes, the Draven crest at his throat, and the words in the old tongue that I had understood only later. I opened my eyes. I was still in the dungeon cell, but the door was open, and the corridor beyond it was full of people who had not been there before. 4 men in dark riding clothes, moving efficiently, speaking to each other in low voices. One of them was examining the lock mechanism on my cell door with the focused attention of someone cataloging evidence. Another was writing in a small leather journal, his pen moving fast. The man with the winter dark eyes was crouched in the corner of my cell, not quite sitting, not quite standing, the posture of someone who had been still for a long time while staying ready to move. He was watching me. When I met his eyes, something in his face shifted. "You're conscious," he said. "Apparently," I said. My voice was terrible. 4 years of minimal use had left it rough and thin, like a hinge that needed oil. I barely recognized it. He moved. Not dramatically, just closed the distance between the corner and where I lay in 2 quiet steps and crouched beside me, close enough that I could see the detail of him clearly now. The scar through his brow was old, long-healed with the slightly raised quality of a wound that had been deep. His eyes were not, as I had thought in the panic of my collapse, the flat blue-gray of winter water. They were more complex than that, darker at the outer edge, lighter near the pupil, with the kind of depth that came either from great intelligence or great age, and he was neither old enough nor young enough for me to determine which. "Can you sit up?" he asked. "Yes," I said before testing this claim. It turned out to be approximately true. I pushed myself upright with a considerable amount of internal negotiation between my body and my will, and sat with my back against the wall and the heavy cloak pooling around me. The movement sent a residual ache through my chest, not the terrifying detonating pain of before, but a deep, muscular soreness, the aftermath of whatever had happened. "Your heart stopped," he said, watching me. "I know," I said. "I restarted it." He said this without drama, as a statement of plain fact. "The Alpha healing touch? Are you familiar with it?" I had heard of it. The old texts, the ones I had read before my life became this cell, described it as a rare ability, present in perhaps 1 in every several hundred wolves with alpha blood. The capacity to reach into another body's systems with focused intent and compel the heart to beat again. It was considered a gift of significant magnitude. It was also, according to the same texts, a profoundly intimate thing to do to a stranger. "You used the healing touch on me," I said. "Yes." "You didn't know who I was." "I still don't know who you are," he said. A pause. "I know who you are," I said. Something crossed his face, not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. "Tell me," he said. "You are Caden Draven," I said, "King of the Draven territory. You came to Keldrath to inspect the northern holdings. and mediate the border dispute, and you are very far from the part of this keep where guests are housed." A silence. "I am," he said. "How do you know this?" "The night guard talks to himself," I said. "I have been listening for 3 years." He looked at me for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, something at the corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, but the structural precursor to one. "3 years of listening to a guard mutter," he said. "It was either that or lose my mind entirely." "What else did he tell you?" "Enough," I said. "Why are you here, in this corridor? This dungeon is not on any official inspection record. I would wager my life on it, which is somewhat ironic given recent circumstances." "No," he said. "It is not on any record. I found it by accident." "What kind of accident?" "The architectural kind," he said. "I was reviewing the original building plans of Keldrath Keep this afternoon. Structural habit. I prefer to understand the buildings I move through, and the plans showed a lower level that was not present on the current household map. The discrepancy interested me." "You found a dungeon," I said, "and you decided to investigate it personally. I glanced at the grate above, the angle of what faint light existed, well past midnight. I had trouble sleeping. Most kings with dungeons hidden in their inspection stops do, I imagine." The almost smile completed itself, briefly, genuinely, and with a quality of surprise. As though he had not expected to smile tonight, and was not entirely sure what to do with the fact that he had. Then it was gone, replaced by something much more serious. "There are 9 cells in this dungeon," he said quietly. "You are the only person in any of them. You have been here, from the evidence, for a very long time. Dorian Marvek told me this morning that the lower level of the keep was a disused storage area." He paused. "Who put you here?" I looked at him. This was the question. The one that mattered. The one I had been waiting 4 years to answer, and now that it was being asked by the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories, I felt something shift inside me. Not hope exactly, not the dangerous kind, but something older and more structural. Things change. Everything changes. "Dorian Marvek," I said. The expression on Caden Draven's face became very still. "Tell me everything," he said. And for the first time in 4 years, I did. Chapter 6. A name spoken aloud. I told him my name first. "Seraphine Eldara Voss," I said. "Second daughter of Edrin Voss of House Voss, Eastern Kaldrick." I had not said it aloud in 4 years. The sound of it in my own voice was disorienting, too familiar and too strange simultaneously, like coming back to a house you grew up in and finding the ceiling lower than you remembered. Caden Draven listened without interrupting. I told him everything in the order it had happened: Kalindra's secret, Thessaly, the pregnancy, my decision to come in her place, the 6 weeks of performance, the dinner with the letter and the wrong dog's name, and then the stairs in the dark, and the 4 years that followed. I told it plainly, without ornamentation, in the flat and practical voice that 4 years of internal monologue had trained me toward. I had rehearsed this story in my head so many times, in case someone ever came, in case I ever had the chance, that it came out cleanly, sequentially, with none of the grief I might have expected. The grief was there. It was simply very old now, and old grief is quiet. Caden listened. He did not move much. He sat with his forearms resting on his knees, his hands loosely clasped, and he watched me speak with an attention that was, I found unexpectedly, not uncomfortable. It was not the attention of someone assembling a legal case, though he was certainly doing that also. It was the attention of someone who understood that the telling was its own significant act, and who had the self-possession to let it happen at its own pace. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Your sister," he said. "Do you know where she is?" "No," I said. "Letters stopped in the first year. I have had no information since." "What was the merchant's name? Thessaly Oren? His family?" "Trading family, mid-size, Eastern District. They operated primarily in textile and grain. He nodded once, turned slightly toward the corridor, and said something in a low voice to the man with the leather journal, who wrote it down without looking up. Then he turned back to me. Dorian Marvek told his household you were a mentally unfit relation of the Voss family, housed for your protection, he said. Yes. He told me this morning the lower level was unused storage. Yes. He has been lying to 2 different audiences simultaneously for 4 years. Dorian is very good at audiences, I said. Caden looked at me. You don't sound angry. I am past the anger, I said. Anger was a first-year emotion. I cannot afford it anymore. It is too expensive. Something in his face responded to this. Not pity, I was grateful to note. Something more like recognition. What do you need right now? He asked. The question was so direct, and so entirely without the usual architecture of political conversation, that it caught me off guard. I had expected procedure, forms, the machinery of authority grinding into motion. Not what do you need? Food, I said. Water that isn't gray. A window. I paused. And I need to know my sister is alive. The first 3 I can give you within the hour, he said. The 4th will take longer, but I will find her. He said it the way he had said, look at me in the old tongue, with his hands over my stopped heart, with the absolute, fundamental refusal to accept that something could not be done. I believed him. I did not know him, and I believed him, which was either evidence of good instinct or 4 years of isolation destroying my critical faculties. I chose to believe it was the former. He stood. I am going to have you moved to a room in the East Wing immediately, he said. It will be under my guard, not Marvek's. You will be safe. In the morning, I will deal with Dorian Marvek. He will deny everything, I said. Let him, said Caden Draven. He said it with such complete and quiet certainty that for a moment I simply stared at him. You are very sure of yourself, I said. I am sure of the building plans, he said. I am sure of the lock on this door, which has been engaged from the outside every day for 4 years, based on the wear pattern on the bolt. I am sure of the marks on your wall. I counted them while you were unconscious. 1,412 days. He paused. I am sure that no mentally unfit relation requires a cell with a bolt on the outside. A silence. 1,412, I said. Yes. I had lost count at some point in the 3rd year. I had estimated. I had thought I was around 3 years and 8 months. That is, I did the arithmetic. That is 3 years and 10 months. Yes. 2 months longer than I thought. I pressed my back against the wall and closed my eyes for a moment. Not from weakness, from the particular, profound adjustment required when you discover that reality has been different from your estimate in a direction that matters. 2 extra months, I said. Yes. He kept me here 2 months longer than I knew. Yes. I opened my eyes. Caden Draven was watching me with that still, careful attention, and in his expression was something I had not seen directed at me in so long that I almost did not recognize it. He saw me. Not the prisoner. Not the complication. Not the woman on the dungeon floor who had stopped being a person to everyone who passed her cell door. He saw Seraphine. Let's get you out of this cell, he said quietly, and he held out his hand. I looked at it for a moment, this large, warm hand extended in a dungeon in the middle of the night by the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories, offered to a starving, filthy woman in a ragged dress on a stone floor. I took it. He pulled me upright with a steadiness that absorbed the full weight of me without adjustment, without strain, and did not let go until I had found my balance on feet that had not walked more than 7 steps in any direction in 4 years. When I was steady, he released my hand. We walked out of the cell. I did not look back. Chapter 7. What surfaces in the light? The east wing of Keldrath Keep smelled of cedar and beeswax, and faintly of the pine forests that pressed against the keep's northern wall. I stood in the center of a room that was not large by any standard of nobility, but which contained a bed with a mattress and blankets, a fireplace with a low burning fire, a table with food on it, real food, bread and cold meat and a cup of something warm, and a window. A window with glass in it, and through the glass, a sky that was beginning at its very easternmost edge to think about the possibility of pale gray. I stood there for a long time. One of Caden's men had brought water, a full basin, warm, with a cloth, and left it without comment on the small table near the fire. A woman I had not seen before had appeared from somewhere in the keep's interior and left a folded set of clothing on the chair near the bed. She had looked at me with an expression carefully arranged into neutrality, but her eyes had been shocked before she controlled them. I understood. I had not seen myself in 4 years, but I had a reasonable estimate of what 4 years in a dungeon does to a face. I washed slowly. There is no other way to do it when you have been cold for so long that warmth feels like an assault. Your skin registers it as pain before it registers it as comfort, and you have to wait through the first response to get to the second. I washed my face and my hands and my arms and stood close to the fire until I stopped shaking. Then I sat at the table and ate. I ate slowly, which was not preference but necessity. The body, after extended deprivation, cannot simply receive abundance. It has to be reintroduced to it in careful stages. I knew this. I ate the bread first, small pieces, and drank the warm liquid, some kind of herbed broth, thin and clean and remarkable, and waited to see how my body received it before moving to the meat. It received it cautiously, like a door opened just wide enough to see who was knocking before committing to entry. While I ate, I thought about Caden Draven. He had left me in the East Wing room with 2 of his guards posted outside the door and a simple instruction: sleep if you can. I will come in the morning. And then he had gone, without ceremony, without the kind of extended leave-taking that powerful men often perform to remind you of their power. He was not what I had expected. I had formed a picture of the Draven King from Peter's muttering, and from what public knowledge I had accumulated before my imprisonment. A northern king from a cold territory. Formidable. Known for the ruthless efficiency of his border management and the particular quality of stillness he brought to negotiations. The kind of stillness, it was said, that made other parties more nervous than shouting would have. What I had not assembled from any of this was a man who reviewed building plans for architectural interest. A man who found a hidden dungeon and descended into it alone, past midnight, without sending a subordinate. A man who said, "What do you need?" and meant it. A man who counted scratches on a wall while I was unconscious, and came up with 1,412. I finished the bread. I tried the meat. I thought about the way he had looked at me in the dungeon, that expression that I had identified, cautiously, as seeing rather than looking, and I thought about the moment he had held out his hand. And then I stopped thinking about it, because that particular line of thought led somewhere I was not equipped to navigate. I had not been a person in 4 years. I had not been seen in 4 years. The warmth of being looked at by someone with that quality of attention felt enormous, and overwhelming and dangerous, and I understood that I was in a fragile enough state that I might mistake it for something it was not. He was a king investigating a crime in his territory. I was the crime's victim. That was the architecture of it. I needed to hold that clearly. I wrapped myself in the blanket from the bed and sat in the chair near the fire and watched the window as the sky outside moved from dark gray to lighter gray, to the first thin thread of rose along the eastern edge. Dawn. Actual dawn. I pressed my fingertips against the cold glass of the window and watched the light come, and something in my chest that had been contracted for so long, I had stopped noticing it began, very slightly, to release. When Caden came, it was mid-morning. The sun was fully up, pale and winter-thin, and the light through the window was the kind that makes everything look slightly unreal. Too clean, too precise, like a painting of a room rather than a room itself. He knocked before entering. I noted this. He came in with 2 people, a physician, who examined me thoroughly and with professional detachment, and confirmed what I had suspected. Malnourished, significantly below healthy weight, with evidence of cardiac stress consistent with what had happened the previous night, but no permanent damage to the heart that he could identify. This last point, he noted, was remarkable given the circumstances. "The healing touch sealed it," he said to Caden, not to me. "I know," said Caden. The second person was the man with the leather journal, whose name turned out to be Roven, and who was apparently Caden's head of intelligence, and also, it seemed, someone who had been awake all night. "I have information about Kalindra Voss," Roven said, looking at me. My hands tightened in my lap. "Tell me," I said. "She is alive," he said. "She and Thessaly Oren have been living in the Kaldric Midlands for 3 years, under assumed names. They have a daughter, age 3. They operate a small trading concern." He paused. "She has been searching for you for 2 years. The search stalled because Dorian Marvek's story, the unfit relation narrative, was consistent, and there were no contradicting accounts. 3 years old. The child was 3 years old. I had gone into that dungeon to give Kalindra's child a life, and the child existed, and was 3 years old, and was alive. Something moved through my face that I could not control. I did not try to control it. I sat in the chair by the window in the east wing of Keldrath Keep, with the pale winter sun on my hands, and I let whatever it was move through me without interference. Caden, I noticed, looked away while this happened. Not from discomfort, I thought. From respect. When I had steadied, I looked at Roven. "Can you get a message to her?" I asked. "Already drafted," he said. "It will go out within the hour." I nodded. I looked at Caden. "You said you would deal with Dorian Marvek in the morning," I said. "Yes," he said. "It is morning." "It is," he said. "Will you come?" Chapter 8. The Accounting. Dorian Marvek was in his study when we arrived. He was seated behind a desk of dark, polished wood, reading, or performing the act of reading, a document that he set aside with the smooth, unhurried movement of a man who has prepared for this meeting, and intends for his composure to be the first thing anyone notices. He had prepared well. His clothing was immaculate, his expression arranged into something that combined deference and confidence in precisely calibrated measure. He had the particular quality of readiness that comes from a night spent constructing a version of events. He had not, I thought, prepared for me. When I walked through the door behind Caden, the composure cracked. Not dramatically, Dorian was too practiced for drama, but the document he had set aside shifted under his hand, and his eyes went to me with a flash of something genuine before the arrangement reconstituted itself. "My Lord King," he said, rising, and a pause, threaded with performance. "Lady Seraphine, I had not expected—" "No," said Caden. "You had not." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The temperature of the room changed in the way that certain voices can change a room, not through volume, but through a quality of absolute authority that makes the air itself feel differently weighted. Dorian looked at Caden. Something behind his eyes was calculating furiously. "I imagine there has been some confusion," he began. "Sit down," said Caden. Dorian sat. Caden did not. He stood in the center of the room with his hands at his sides and spoke in the same quiet, controlled voice he had used in the dungeon the night before. But beneath the control now was something that I felt in my chest like a low, sustained vibration. The alpha presence. The thing that made other wolves feel it involuntarily. The dominance that was not performed but simply exuded, the way heat comes off stone that has been in the sun. I had read about it. I had never been in the room with it directed at another person. It was significant. "I reviewed the building plans of Keldrath Keep yesterday," Caden said. "I found a lower level not present on the household map. I investigated it. I found 9 cells. I found Lady Seraphine Aldara Voss in the last cell, in a state consistent with approximately 4 years of imprisonment." He paused. "You told me yesterday morning that this level was unused storage. There has been... I also had my intelligence officer review the records of any communications between your household and House Voss over the past 4 years. He found 1 letter. sent by you to Lord Edrin Voss, 2 months after Lady Seraphine arrived here, informing him that his daughter, described as Calindra, had proved mentally and emotionally unsuitable for the proposed match, and would be housed in Keldrath for the foreseeable future while the family determined appropriate next steps. Caden let that settle. You told her father she was here. You told him she was unsuitable. You told him she was being housed. And then you sealed her in a dungeon and allowed him to believe that was a reasonable arrangement. Dorian said nothing. Her father died, I said. I did not plan to speak, but I had been standing in that doorway with 4 years pressing against my ribs, and the words came out before I could contain them. He died not knowing what you did. He died believing I was here by some form of agreement, some arrangement he didn't understand but couldn't contest. You took that from him. You took the truth from him and let him die with it. The room was silent. Dorian looked at me, and for just a moment, for the space of a breath, the composure was completely gone, and what I saw underneath it was not the cold calculation I had braced for. It was shame. Old shame. The kind that has been pressed down and reinforced over years until it has become structural, load-bearing, something the whole architecture of a person rests on. He was ashamed of what he had done. He had been ashamed of it for 4 years, and the shame had not made him open the door. It had made him keep it more tightly shut, because people who are ashamed of their choices rarely reverse them. Reversal would require admission, and admission would require facing what the choice says about who they are. I had not expected to feel anything for him. I was surprised to find that what I felt, looking at that flash of shame before he put the walls back up, was something close to pity. Cold pity. The kind that does not forgive and does not excuse, but does recognize. He was a small man inside an architecture of control, and he had done an enormous damage from that smallness, and he would live with it in ways I was only beginning to understand. Caden laid out the charges. Unlawful imprisonment. Fraud against the Crown. The discrepancy between the building plans and the household map constituted concealment from official inspection. Defamation of the Voss name. He delivered each one in the same measured voice, and with each one I watched something settle and solidify in the room, the way concrete sets. Dorian's lawyers were summoned. Documents were produced. Roven, who had been in the corridor with 2 of Caden's soldiers, entered and presented the evidence with the economical precision of a man who had been doing this for a long time and had no interest in theater. It took 3 hours. At the end of 3 hours, Dorian Marvick looked 10 years older than when we had entered. Caden turned to me once, during a break while the lawyers conferred. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Not performing the question, actually asking it. "I don't know yet," I said, which was the honest answer. He nodded. He accepted the honest answer without requiring it to be more comfortable. "It will take time," he said. "I know. The legal process will be longer than today," he said. "There will be a formal hearing before the regional council. You will be required to testify. It will not be easy." "I have been in a dungeon for 4 years," I said. "A formal hearing will be manageable." Again, that brief, surprised quality of expression. The almost smile. "Yes," he said. "I imagine it will." Chapter 9. What breaks before it heals. The formal hearing was held 8 days later in the Keldrick Regional Hall, a stone building in the market town of Vithara that smelled of old wood and tallow candles, and the particular musty solemnity of a room that has seen too many difficult truths. In those 8 days, I ate. I slept. I sat in the window of the East Wing room and watched the winter light move across the keep's courtyard. I watched the guards change shifts. I watched a dog cross the courtyard 3 times a day at approximately the same intervals, and wondered what it was looking for. I watched snow begin in the northern hills and move slowly southward. I existed in the world again. Present tense. Continuous. It was harder than I had expected. Not the physical recovery. That was simply slow and progressive, the body doing its patient arithmetic. The harder thing was the internal adjustment. 4 years of compression, of reducing yourself to the minimum necessary for survival, does not decompress quickly. I found myself catching the reflexes of imprisonment in small ways, sitting with my back against the wall instinctively, waking from sleep to count drops from a ceiling that no longer dripped, reaching for the fragment of stone I had used to scratch marks into mortar that was no longer there. The body remembers what the mind tries to move past. Caden came each evening. Not for long. 30 minutes, perhaps 40. He was managing the mechanics of the legal process, coordinating with the regional council, communicating with the Draven court about the jurisdiction implications, and doing the work of a king who has discovered, in the middle of a routine inspection, something that has become significantly unroutine. He was busy in the comprehensive way that people with large territories and complex responsibilities are always busy. But he came. Each evening, in the hour before the kitchen sent up my dinner, he came and sat, in the chair while I sat on the edge of the bed, or at the window, and talked with me. Sometimes about the legal process, what to expect at the hearing, how the testimony would be structured. Sometimes about other things. He asked me about the marks on the wall, the 1,412 scratches. I told him about the counting system, the drops from the ceiling, the quarterly marks. He listened with the focused attention I was beginning to understand was simply how he listened, entirely, without the restless quality that many people brought to conversation, the slight lean forward that meant they were waiting for their turn. "What else did you use to stay sane?" he asked. I told him about the recitation, the poems, the names, the rooms, the systematic maintenance of memory as a deliberate act of self-preservation. "What poems?" he asked. I told him the first one that came to mind, a short one my mother had taught me, about the river in early spring when the ice breaks and the water moves fast under the remaining ice shelf, dark and urgent and free. I said it from memory, in the way I had said it hundreds of times in the dark, and when I finished there was a silence. "Where did she learn that?" Caden asked. "I don't know," I said. "She died when I was 6. I have only what she gave me before then." "It's from the old southern tradition," he said. 8th century. It was originally a navigation poem. Sailors used rhythmic verse as memory anchors for route information. The emotional content is secondary to the function. I stared at him. "You know it?" I said. "I know of it," he said. "The Draven Library has a collection of early southern maritime literature." A pause. "Your mother may have had southern ancestry. I had never known this. I would likely never be able to confirm it. But the idea of it, of a thread connecting my mother to something old and maritime and far away, a thread I had been carrying in my memory without knowing its origin, sat in me strangely, like finding an extra room in a house you thought you knew completely. On the 5th day, a letter came from Kalindra. Rovan brought it to me in the morning, without ceremony, and left me alone with it. It was 4 pages long. I read it once, quickly, to confirm she was alive. Then I set it down and looked out the window for a while. Then I picked it up and read it slowly, the way it deserved to be read. She had been searching for 2 years. She had hit the wall of Dorian's story every time, the unfit relation narrative, consistently maintained, impossible to penetrate without access to the keep itself. She had written to the regional council twice. She had been told, politely, that the matter was a private family arrangement. She had contacted 3 different legal advocates, all of whom had advised her that without contradicting evidence, there was nothing to pursue. She was coming. She would arrive within the week, she wrote. She and Thessaly and their daughter, whose name was Serena. Serena. A version of my name, carried forward into the next generation without anyone outside Kalindra knowing why. I sat with that for a very long time. The hearing itself was brutal in the specific way that formal legal proceedings are brutal, not through violence, but through the meticulous, relentless requirement to recount, in organized and sequential detail, every element of an experience you have spent considerable internal effort learning to hold at a managed distance. I testified for 2.5 hours. I kept my voice flat and my hands still in my lap, and I answered each question with the precision of someone who has had 4 years to think through exactly what happened and in what order. I did not perform grief. I did not ask for sympathy. I laid out the facts in the sequence they had occurred and let the facts perform their own function. The council asked Dorian questions. He answered some of them with the careful architecture of a man who has prepared his version. But the building plans were in evidence. The boltware analysis from Rovin's team was in evidence. The letter to my father, in Dorian's hand, was in evidence. The 1,412 marks on the dungeon wall, documented and photographed by Rovin's scribe, were in evidence. Dorian's architecture had no foundation it could stand on. Halfway through the afternoon session, when the council presented the boltware analysis and asked him to explain how an allegedly vacant cell had its bolt engaged daily for 4 years, Dorian Marvek stopped answering questions. He looked at his lawyer. His lawyer looked at the floor. And in the silence that followed, the last structure of his constructed story came down. I was watching him when it happened, and I saw again, briefly, completely, that flash of old shame beneath the surface. And beneath the shame, something else. Something that surprised me. Relief. As though the weight of 4 years of maintained lies was heavier than he had admitted to himself, and the collapse of them, for all that it cost him, was also a setting down of something unbearable. I turned away. Caden was seated to my left, in his capacity as the presiding royal authority. He was watching the council. When the silence fell, he spoke 3 quiet sentences that closed the session and sent the council to deliberate. Then he looked at me, just once, and I understood in that look that whatever was building between us, slowly, carefully, in evening conversations and shared silences, and the particular vulnerability of being known by someone in the worst moment of your life, it was real, and it was something neither of us had planned for. I looked back, and neither of us looked away. Chapter 10. What Remains. Kalindra arrived on a Thursday. I knew it was Thursday because I'd begun keeping track again, not with stone fragments and dripping water, but with the ordinary markers of ordinary life, the changing of guards and the serving of meals, and the rhythm of a world that had not stopped moving while I was underground. She came through the keep's main gate in a hired carriage, and I was standing in the courtyard when it arrived, because Rovin had told me it was coming, and I had not been able to make myself stay inside. I stood in the cold morning air with a borrowed coat over my shoulders, and I watched the carriage door open. She was 31 now. I had last seen her at 19. The change was visible in the way she held herself, in the steadiness of her face, in the particular quality that comes to people who have survived choices they cannot undo and made peace with what the surviving cost. She was beautiful still and tired, and she stepped out of that carriage and looked at me standing in the courtyard, and her face did something I have no adequate words for. I walked toward her. She walked toward me. We met in the middle of the courtyard, and she put her arms around me, and I put mine around her, and neither of us said anything for a long time, because there was nothing that language could adequately do with what was between us, and we both knew it. Her daughter was 3 years old and had brown eyes, and Kalindra's particular quality of calm, watchful intelligence, and her name was Serena. She looked at me from behind Thessaly's leg with the focused, curious assessment of a child who has not yet learned to perform her reactions, and then she walked toward me and held out a small wooden figure, a horse, roughly carved, obviously beloved, as an offering. I crouched down and accepted it with both hands. "What is her name?" I asked, holding the horse. "Maple," said Serena. "She's beautiful," I said. Serena looked at me for a moment. "You have sad eyes," she said, with the straightforward precision of the very young. "Yes?" I said. "I do, but they're getting better." She took Maple back. She seemed satisfied with this answer. She walked back to Thessaly and leaned against his leg again and continued her watchful assessment of the courtyard. Thessaly shook my hand. He was quieter than I had expected, with the quality of a person who understood the weight of what his existence had cost and carried it seriously. He did not make speeches. He met my eyes and said simply, "Thank you. I know it doesn't cover it." "No," I said, "but it's enough." The council's judgment came 2 days after Kalindra arrived. Dorian Marvek was stripped of 3 of his northern holdings, the ones that had been the subject of the border dispute, which was now moot, as they were to be placed under Draven administrative oversight pending redistribution. He was required to make financial restitution to House Voss, calculated on the basis of 4 years of unlawful imprisonment and damage to the family's reputation. He was formally censured by the regional council and barred from holding any appointed position in the regional administration for 10 years. He was not imprisoned. I had not asked for imprisonment. I had been asked by Caden's legal officers what outcome I sought, and I had thought about it for a long time before answering. What I had said was this: I want my name restored. I want the record corrected. I want the truth on paper, in the official record, where it cannot be revised. That was what I had wanted, and that was what the judgment delivered. My name, Seraphine Eldara Voss, second daughter of House Voss, was formally entered into the regional record as unlawfully imprisoned and wrongfully defamed. The judgment stated plainly what had happened and who had done it. The truth, on paper. Permanent. Dorian Marvek left Keldrath Keep 3 days after the judgment. I did not watch him go. I was in the courtyard with Serena, who was teaching me the names of clouds with the absolute authority of someone who has recently learned something and intends to share the full extent of their knowledge. That one is a sheep, she said, pointing. Cumulus, I said. She looked at me. Sheep, she said firmly. You're right, I said. It's a sheep. She nodded, satisfied, and pointed to another. Caden found me there. He came across the courtyard in the unhurried way that was characteristic of him, and Serena assessed him with her watchful brown eyes, and then apparently decided he was acceptable, and returned her attention to the clouds. He stood beside me. We looked at the sky. The Draven court expects me back within the week, he said. I know, I said. A pause. I have been trying, he said, to identify the correct way to say what I want to say. I have been finding it surprisingly difficult. That is unusual for you, I said. Extremely, he said, with a quality of dry honesty that made me want to smile. Say it plainly, I said. You told me once you preferred plain. He turned to look at me. I would like you to come to Draven, he said. Not as a prisoner, not as a ward, not as a case to be managed. As my guest, for as long as you want. And while you are there, I would like the opportunity to know you in a context that is not a dungeon or a courtroom. The winter sun was thin and pale above the keep walls. My breath came out white in the cold air. Serena, who had lost interest in clouds and was now attempting to stack small stones in the corner of the courtyard, hummed something tuneless to herself. I thought about 4 years in the dark. I thought about the candle flame I had held in the center of my mind. She is alive. As long as I stay silent, she is alive. And how it had almost gone out in the end. I thought about the night my heart stopped and what it had felt like to hear boots on the stairs that were different from every other pair of boots I had heard in 4 years. I thought about 1,412 scratches on a wall, counted by someone who had not yet met me, who had come down those stairs alone in the middle of the night because he found a discrepancy in a building plan and could not leave it unexamined. I need time, I said, to be a person again, in an ordinary way. I am not sure how long that takes. I know, he said. I cannot walk into a new life immediately from the ruins of the last one. I know, he said. I am not asking you to. I am asking you to come to Draven and have a window, and meals, and the library, which is significant, and the company, which I hope will be adequate. A pause. I am asking you to let the recovery happen somewhere that is not Keldrath, which I suspect holds limited appeal. Accurate, I said. Serena had successfully stacked 4 small stones and was regarding this achievement with the serious satisfaction of an engineer whose calculations have proved correct. Draven is cold, I said. Yes, he said, though not dungeon cold. High bar, I said. Lowest possible bar, he said. I looked at him. He looked at me. And in his winter-dark eyes, beneath the stillness and the authority and the particular quality of attention I had come to recognize as simply his, the way some people carry blue eyes, or a certain way of holding their head, was something that was not a demand and not a plea. It was simply the truth of what he felt, offered plainly, without performance. In the way I had come to understand was the only way he offered anything. He had come down the stairs. He had counted the marks. He had said you were not allowed to die in the old tongue over a stopped heart in a dungeon that smelled of mildew and forgotten years. And then he had come back each evening, in the 30 or 40 minutes he could spare from the work of being a king, and he had asked me what poems I remembered, and listened to the answers. "All right," I said. "All right," he said. "Draven," I said, "with the library and the window." "Yes." The almost smile completed itself again, and this time it did not disappear quickly. It stayed, and it changed his face in a way that made him look, for a moment, not like a king at all. Just a man who had not expected this evening to go the way it had. Serena, who had been paying more attention than we realized, looked up from her stones. "Are you friends?" she asked, looking between us with her brown, watchful eyes. Caden looked at her seriously, the way he looked at everything. "Yes," he said. Serena considered this. "Good," she said, and went back to her stones. We stood in the courtyard as the winter light went from thin gold to pale rose to the blue of early evening. The stones on the keep wall caught the last of the sun and held it. Somewhere in the north wing, I could hear Kalindra's voice and Thessaly's answering, the ordinary sound of two people building a life out of the materials available to them. I had gone underground with one name and emerged with all of them. Seraphine, sister, survivor. Serena's almost aunt, who would teach her the proper names of clouds, even if she insisted on calling them sheep. And perhaps, slowly, carefully in the library of a cold northern court with a significant window. Something more. I did not know yet what shape the rest of my life would take, but I was present in it again, and the sky above the keep walls was extraordinary. End.